How's that?
Yeah, great.
We good? Awesome. Sorry about that. Cool. So yeah, the top 5 mistakes I used to make that I look back on now as mistakes. So what this isn't is a talk about the 5 mistakes I'm currently making, or my top 5 mistakes I make at the moment. So either you can teach me about those, or I'll learn those over time, and maybe I can do another talk about that, because I'm well aware that I'll be making them. Cool. So I'm just going to rip through it. So I'm on to the first slide here. Number 1, being too helpful. So this is something I used to do a lot, and I think it's easy when you first learn a few tricks. You're first getting into this stuff, and you're like, oh, I can make some text that no one can see, but is still available to screen readers or something like that. You can get a bit overzealous and kind of start, whoa, I'll just make it so amazing that it'll be the best thing ever. And you can kind of lead yourself down the garden path and end up being too helpful in a way that you're just creating a lot of noise for people. So screen readers is the example that comes to mind for me there. I thought it'd be funny to talk about an analogy when you could make someone a cup of tea, but you don't necessarily need to tell them how to drink that tea. If you made it, you might ask them if they want milk. Sure, that's helpful, but you don't need to say, here's your tea. If you would like a sip, lift it to your mouth and just tip it slightly and it'll pour into your mouth. So just to give that some context, maybe you're working on a form, accessible form, and you've just learned about how to use radio controls with the keyboard. And because it's new to you, you think, oh, maybe we should put some screen reader text in here that says, oh, you can use your up and down arrows to select the options. But you're just telling people things that they already know and that they've been dealing with for years. So yeah, just be aware that don't be too helpful, even if it's good intentions can kind of make things tricky. I've got avoiding duplicates there, but I've got another slide coming up that's gonna illustrate that a little bit. So I'll leave that till then. Yeah, sort of mentioned telling people things that they already know. Just be aware that some people have been using these things for years or been working around issues for years. They're not always going to need you to let them know that they can click a button or something like that. Button, click here to do this thing, or if you click this, press enter to click the button. That's all things that they've learned. People know. Labeling all the things. I've got under being too helpful, because once you learn how to some labeling techniques, maybe you're using aria label, or maybe you're sort of visually hiding some text inside a button or a link or something like that. You can think, oh, well, I'll just label everything. Like someone with one of those label guns that walks around the house looking for things to label. Yeah, just be aware of that. So I guess my point there is just ask yourself the question, like, how do I know that this is actually a good idea? And if you can't back that up, if it just seems like you're doing it because you want to go above and beyond, then maybe you don't need to do that. Yeah, and I've just put the point here that you can end up accidentally creating a completely different experience. And one thing I always sort of clung on to, and I still think is valid, is you're trying to give the same experience to everyone, or at least give everyone access to the same information. Give people this whole other experience just because they're on a screen reader or something like that. I'm going to call out my overfocus on screen readers as well as one of my points. But just moving on to slide 2. So now I'm just showing an illustration of what I mentioned before, which is duplicate labels, things like that. So I've got here just a mock-up of a button that I just put in the slides, and it's a like button. So there's a border of the button, and there's a little heart, and next to the heart it says like. And so in the past, when I was first getting started, I might have thought, hey, I've got an SVG here. I know how to give an SVG an accessible name. I'll give that SVG a title, a title tag inside the SVG. And so let's say you did that and you gave it the title of like, because that's what the context of your heart was at the time. But then also buttons get their accessible name from their content, things that are inside. So you've got the heart there, and you've also got the word like. And so by the time you've got both those things, if you did be too helpful in this case, label the SVG when the text was already there right next to it, you can end up having a button that's called like instead of just like. And as you sort of first use the screen reader, sometimes you might think, oh, I didn't realize that this is unexpectedly awful. But little things like that can trip you up. So in that scenario, I would either not label that. I could be wrong with this, but I would not label that SVG with the title, and I may even put aria hidden equals true on that, because I'm leaving the words like to label that button. If I really wanted to go overboard, and this is where I'd probably end up being too helpful again, I might hide some visually hidden text in a span or something that says like this particular post or whatever the context is. But that's just a vague, that's not necessarily a good example, but just to illustrate the point of duplicating names by accident. Cool, so next slide, number 2. Just because you can aria doesn't mean you should. I think it's exciting when you first get to know aria and you realize, and you sort of read the spec and you're like, oh, okay, they've got all these patterns for how I should be doing everything. And you don't realize that, oh, okay, that's sort of like almost like a future kind of thing that, yeah, there's a lot of people on older technology because if they update, they'll have to learn all their workarounds again, or that's not always going to be the case, but that you have to sort of keep in mind that some people might be on some older versions of things than you might naturally be supporting. And even things like versions of screen readers, some of these more proprietary ones have been expensive in the past, and they might not want to be upgrading. And so even something as simple as aria label might not work as consistently across everyone's software as you might imagine. So the golden rule with this stuff, as far as I've heard, is just stick to your HTML, do everything, your semantic HTML. Don't lean on aria unless you're just doing some extensions on top of what HTML couldn't provide. But when you do reach for it, so I was in that position, I was already focusing on HTML and not implementing aria things when I didn't need to, but then I would reach for aria label. And I ended up, after a colleague of mine, Kat, showed me a table of, actually someone's done this comparison of all these browser screen reader combinations. aria label works in all these different ways across all of those things. And I was actually opened my eyes and I thought, okay, maybe we should start using visually hidden text inside these things where we would otherwise reach for aria label. So yeah, aria is still cool, but it's just not as useful as you think it will be when you first start learning about it. I think it's good to keep in mind. Yeah, so number 3, I've lost my timer, by the way. I didn't start properly, so I'm just going to keep it short, but give me a warning, Zoe.
You're good. You're all good, Maz.
Cool. Yeah, number 3, waiting to be ready to do usability testing for accessibility. There was a point in my time at TradeMe where we were building out a big design system that the rest of the company was going to use to help build the new TradeMe, which you'll see on phones these days and some desktops. But yeah, at the time I remember thinking, hey, we're not ready for this. When we started talking, should we do some usability testing for accessibility more towards the beginning? It's like, oh no, there's already so many things that we know we haven't done yet that it would be rude almost to go and ask people how this thing is when there's already millions of things we know we can do. So we should do those things and then go and ask. Whereas that was a mistake I've found later on, because 1, it takes a long time actually to organize that project and get funding for it and put everything together, get all your ducks in a row where you could actually kick off that usability testing. We actually had some lined up just before COVID hit and it was really exciting. And then, yeah, that didn't work out. Hopefully that's just about to kick off now. But yeah, don't wait to be ready, because early on you'll still be getting a lot of great information and you might just learn that things that you thought you knew were actually wrong anyway. So if you can do usability testing for accessibility, just start organizing it almost from day one. Number 4, over prioritizing screen reader support. This is, everyone might have different opinions on this, but for me, I found in my journey, I started my journey by getting into screen reader support, and I was like, oh, okay, this is super interesting. And that sort of brought me into accessibility in general. But I noticed that with a lot of other people as well. And I found like our time in the teams I was supporting, people almost started to think that accessibility and screen reader support were the same thing, digital accessibility, and that as long as they ticked off the screen reader support, then they could sort of check the box. And then we wouldn't focusing so much on cognitive issues, cognitive barriers that we were putting in front of people, which a lot of people could benefit from. And I think it's super interesting or keyboard support even a lot of the time, even though that should be a given. Yeah, wasn't always, sometimes put as a follow-up case that it's hard to prioritize sometimes. So sometimes it's done and it's awesome. But yeah, it can be easy to over prioritize one thing, whatever it is for you. For me, it was screen reader support, which I still think is like an essential part of making your products accessible. It's just not the be all and end all in itself. And you might look at your users, if you can get this information, can be tricky, but yeah. And it's not only people who are blind or have low vision that use screen readers. All sorts of people use screen readers for different reasons. So it is a wider group than just blind and low vision. But it's interesting to think how many people might have cognitive issues or benefit from the thinking we could put into making things easy to use from a cognitive load perspective. So just be aware of that. If you see that happening as you progress with your company, then challenge that a little bit if you can. This is a massive one for me. This is kind of my last one, because the last one will take no time at all. But there was a long time where I said, this might seem really ridiculous to a lot of people, but we was doing our work and we were prioritizing what accessibility things that we were going to be focusing on as we built this design system out. And I remember thinking a lot, like, oh, okay, I think people who are deaf and hard of hearing will kind of be fine, because we're not doing anything audio visual anyway. And there was this big aha moment. I can't even remember where I heard about it, but I think some people came in and spoke to us. Some people who were deaf came in and spoke to us and explained that actually, if you grow up with NZSL as your first language, or Auslan, or depending on where you are, if sign is your first language, you might actually, your English literacy in terms of reading and writing might be really far behind what someone like me would expect and had expected. I was thinking, oh, people who are deaf and hard of hearing would just use the web the same way as me, as long as it's not like videos involved and audio things involved. And that was so wrong that now I look back at it and think, wow, I was so naive on that one. So I thought that was a good one to point out. And the last one, asking for permission. Maybe just don't. If you're in a situation where you're doing some work and you feel like you could make it more accessible, and that's part of doing your job properly, maybe you don't need to ask so much for permission. That's up to you and to figure that one out. But there's a certain amount of confidence they can give you to be like, actually, this is just part of doing my job. I'm just going to do it. Yeah, so that's me. So that's from a front-end developer's perspective, who's 5 years into caring about accessibility and being aware of it. In terms of digital accessibility, that's kind of my 5 things I look back on and think, those are all things I thought I knew that now I realize were a bit wrong. And like I said in the beginning, I'm very well aware that there'll be a lot of things I'll look back on from what I do now, what I think I know now, that will turn out to be, fodder for another presentation. Thanks a lot for your time, and thanks for giving me the chance to speak. So,
thank you so much, Maz. We really enjoyed that presentation. Some great tips. It's always great learning from other people's mistakes. Unfortunately, not for the person, but yeah, we can learn a lot. Thank you very much, Maz. So we're going to open up the Q&A now. And if any of the panelists also have questions, please feel free to post them or to just directly ask Maz. Lauren, do we have any in the
Yes,
Q&A?
we do. We have a question from Tonya. So how does everyone get the same access when their access needs can vary so greatly?
Yeah, I guess that's a great question. I feel unqualified to answer that. But yeah, I guess what springs to mind is that people working on products which can be more accessible, it's kind of up to us all and people to advocate these things to make sure that we are considering the broad range of needs that we all have. So it's just about educating ourselves, coming to things like this. Yeah, like I say, I feel really unqualified to speak so generally on the topic, but yeah, hopefully that's somewhat some sort of answer.
I see Kylie's raised your hand. Did you want to comment on that as well, Kylie?
Yes, Maz, I have a question. Why do so many front-end developers not do what you do? Is it just they don't know, or is it because they are under pressure with deadlines and things and they want to take shortcuts? Why is it, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's both of those things. But one big reason that I've spoken about in the past is just that we need to talk about it more, and it needs to be something that's pulled up on code reviews, because as front-end developers, like, opinions are flying everywhere all the time, and everyone's always like talking about the best way to do everything. If none of those conversations involve accessibility and the things that we're doing to ensure that everyone can use our products, then that becomes not important, because someone just told you 10 things you had to fix with your code that you could learn from, and it could be better because of these things. If some of those things aren't within the kind of realm of accessibility, then you send people the message that it's not important. So I think the more that people talk about it and the more that people pull it up, even if you know that, let's say you know you're doing a code review and you know that someone's not going to have the time to do, not going to be given the time by their team or whatever the situation is to do keyboard functionality on something, you still call it out anyway, and you just say that's something that needs to be done. Make sure that you do that before it goes out. And even if you know they're not going to be able to take that on, at least like you've put the pressure on. So yeah, I think making sure we all talk about it is probably number one, because that makes it important and relevant.
Thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Maz. We have another question if we still have time. A question from Dan saying, did you approach disability organisations directly to organise testers or use a third party or go between such as DIA?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so when I was at TradeMe, which I've moved on from now, the first thing that happened is the UX team put out an invite through friends and family and associates of the people that worked there, which is quite a big company, so there was a few of us. So we sort of just branched out that way and then got people in just for interviews, just for chats, not to do usability testing on particular flows or the product or anything. And that was kind of step one, and that was super interesting. And I think we could have done more to kind of spread that throughout the company, but it was our first sort of step at getting to know real people and getting some real information coming in. From then on, it moved to approaching people like Intopia, and we ended up progressing with Blind and Low Vision New Zealand had something called Access Advisors, and we had a relationship with them from the past as well. And so we were working with them to source some people that they had access to do usability testing remotely, and we were going to be visiting in homes. This is all sort of pre-COVID world, and yeah, so I think hopefully that's about to kick off. But yeah, combination of going through our own networks and then reaching out to third parties who focus on these things. And I think that's a really good thing to do, because you need that variety. And if you're in a bigger company that's got the budget and can do it faster, that's probably the way that I would recommend go. Because there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of expertise involved in running those UX sessions that goes beyond the skill set of UX people in general, like if they haven't had a focus on this stuff, running those sessions. So won't be true for everyone, but for a lot of people, yeah, having that additional support from a third party that specializes is going to be a good idea. Hopefully that answers the question. I know I can go off topic and answers.
Yes. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next speaker,